Count d'Artois, who afterwards became Charles X, had left French territory in 1789. He resided in Turin and in Mantua, where he had an interview with the Emperor Leopold. After numerous peregrinations in Germany to London and to Edinburgh, this prince traveled to St. Petersburg, where the Empress Catherine presented him with a useless sword. On his return from Russia, Count d'Artois showed himself on the coasts of Brittany and had been landed in the Ile Dieu. In 1813, he was in Germany, and in 1814 in Bâle, whence he returned to France by way of the Franche-Comté, with the title of Lieutenant General of the Kingdom. Apart from their intelligences with the foreign powers, Louis XVI's brothers never ceased, from the time of their exile, to keep agents in Paris and to make overtures to these agents to members of the Convention or the Directoire, to the high civil functionaries, or to the generals. The immense popularity with Pichegru had enjoyed in France after the conquest of Holland drew the attention of the royalists upon him. Since 1795, relations had been established between this general, the Prince de Condé, and other Bourbon agents. The reward of services at first clandestine, intended afterwards to become public, which had been or were to be tendered by Pichegru to the royalist cause, was to be the governorship of Alsace, 1 million in money, 200,000 francs a year, the Arbois estate, which was to bear the name of Pichegru, 12 cannon, the Grand Cordon of the Orders of the Holy Ghost and of St. Louis, and finally the dignity of Marshal of France. The importance of the price was proportioned to the greatness of the treason. The part intended for Barras was less magnificent. In the month of April 1799, the Marquis de Maisonfort proposed the assistance of this director to the Comte de Lille. In the month of July following, Barras received letters patent signed by the king and countersigned by Monsieur de Saint-Priest, sealed with the Great Seal, after assuring him of amnesty, awarded him 12 million francs for himself and 2 million francs for his collaborators. This was 4 months before Brumaire the 18th. This secret covenant was not known to Napoleon, who heard of it from Consul Lebrun, to whom Abbé Montesquieu had revealed it. On June 9th, 1796, the Comte de Lille had authorized Pichegru to approach certain influential generals in the army in Italy. Monsieur Roch de Montgaillard was also charged shortly before Fructidor 18th to offer General Bonaparte the viceroyalty of Corsica, the post of Marshal of France, and the Blue Cordon. But this agent was unable to fulfill his mission and could not reach General Bonaparte. The silence which General Moreau observed during 6 months on the seizure of General Kingland's Vance, in which Moreau had found the correspondence of Pichegru with the Prince of Condé. This silence, we say, has seemed to some as a proof of Moreau's interested complicity in the royalist conspiracy. However, half a century has passed since that event took place, and as no fresh revelations have been made on the subject, it remains established that Moreau was not mixed up in Pichegru's machinations. With regard to the pretender's alleged relations with the Revolutionary Party, history may perhaps disclose these someday. But up to the present time, it has been impossible to obtain other than obscure and incomplete information on this point. Apart from the letters which the Comte de Lille wrote to the first consul and the applications made in his name by Vendéen and other chiefs, the Comte d'Artois, faithful to his habits of gallantry, had entrusted the beautiful Duchesse de Guiche with a mission of seduction at the court of the first consul, believing Josephine to have an inclination towards royalist ideas and an influence over Napoleon, which she did not possess. The future King Charles X had caused the most magnificent assurances of the gratitude of the Bourbons to be made to her through Madame de Guiche if the first consul should consent to favor the reestablishment. Josephine had received the Duchess with affability and had even asked her to lunch, but she also very politely refused her offers. The answer which the First Consul made to the proposal that there should be erected on the Place du Carrousel a column surmounted with his statue crowning the Bourbons is well known. My tomb, he said, will serve as pedestal to the statue. The emissaries of the two brothers often arrived with contradictory instructions. The Comte de Lille feigned to lend himself to ideas of constitutional monarchy, of amnesty, and of amicable arrangement with the persons who had bought national property. Count d'Artois spoke of nothing but absolute monarchy and revenge. These princes were assisted by Russia and by England. A fact worthy of mention is that the princes of the House of Orleans figured in no intrigue against their country, took no part in any league with foreigners, and placed themselves in the pay of no European powers. The only exception to this line of conduct, which can be quoted, is the relations between the head of the Orleans family and the Cadiz Regency in the month of May 1810. The abdication of the emperor brought with it the prescription of the national colors, which he had covered with glory and rendered the object of the respect of all the world. This great event was carried through with an ease which astonished the foreigners. One of the first acts of the new government, in its contempt for the national glory, had been to invite the Paris National Guard to assume the white cockade. The leaders of the 12 legions had at first not seemed disposed to obey, but a week later, on a second order, the tricolor disappeared. This apparent resignation emboldened the provisional government to order that the white cockade and the white flag should in future be the cockade and flag of France. The army and the navy submitted to this humiliating necessity with a shudder, and bitter resentment was pressed down to the bottom of their hearts of our officers and even of the private soldiers. The Allies were alarmed by the bombast and the pretension of the royalists. They begged the new king to make use of the elements of the revolution in governing and to give France a constitution. Nevertheless, they looked upon the proscription of the national colors as a reason for security. These colors reminded them of things which they preferred to forget, and moreover, they feared that unless the white flag were hoisted, the whole country might rise to arms against their soldiers. Other foreigners, endowed with more foresight, feared, on the contrary, lest the prescribed colors might become a formidable rallying side for the partisans of the fallen emperor. The white cockade, which was forced upon France during 15 years, the last symbol of the counter-revolution, could not survive the government which was overthrown by the revolution of 1830. A national government reestablished on that day in France the tricolor, which had been adopted by the French nation, which will know no others after all the remembrances of triumphs and greatness of which the blue, white, and red flag had become the emblem. After studying the abdication at Fontainebleau, after his abandonment by his comrades in arms who were impatient to enjoy in peace the honors and riches which he had loaded them, Napoleon kept up an active correspondence with Marie Louise. Not a day passed without his sending her an offer, in spite of the fact that the road to Blois was intercepted by the enemy. Marie Louise sometimes expressed her regret at having left Paris and spoke of her wish to rejoin the emperor. The obstacles which opposed themselves to the realization of this desire, the conflict of contradictory opinions expressed on the subject by those who surrounded her, made her postpone endeavoring to bring this meeting about, much as it was in her thoughts. Her anxiety had reached its highest pitch. The violent emotions which she had undergone, the tears which she was constantly shedding, her painful sleeplessness had cast her into a state of nervousness which nearly approached a convulsive state. She could not imagine what passions were agitating France. The assurances which she had received from her father constantly reverted to her mind. She could not persuade herself that the Emperor of Austria would sacrifice her husband and her son. At the same time, the events which hastened on in Paris left her with few illusions. She was confounded, but like a drowning woman, she clung to the paternal affection which seemed to her her only means of safety. Hearing that the Emperor of Austria was not in Paris, she hoped that he would not consent to what had been done in his absence and that her voice would be listened to. She sent him the Duc de Cador with a pressing letter. The Duc de Cador, former ambassador of France to Vienna, had been treated with the greatest kindness by the Emperor Francis, who had deigned to be the godfather of one of his children. He left Blois on April 6th and was replaced by Monsieur de Montalivet, the post of Secretary of State to the Regency. On the morrow, Count Régnant de Saint-Jean-Angély was sent on the same mission on the 8th. Messieurs de Saint-Aulaire and Bausset left charged with fresh letters from the Empress to the Emperor of Austria. The Empress's stay in Blois alternated between fears and hopes, in the expectation of what Napoleon should decide to do, and especially in the expectation of the turn of events. It was not marked by any important act of government. The Empress presided at Regency councils every day, the object of which was rather to communicate the news that had been received and to exchange opinions than to attend to business. He who put all things in motion was there no more. As nobody could foresee what any day might bring forth, the ministers used to come to the Empress's house in their traveling suits. The only act which emanated from the government in its retreat in Blois was a proclamation to the French, which, so to speak, attracted no attention whatsoever. The Emperor's brothers, Joseph and Jerome, as well as the Arch-Chancellor, made an application to the Empress on the morning of April 8th, which has given rise to erroneous interpretations. The regent's counselors had fears for which there was good foundation for the safety of Napoleon's wife and child. And it was with this in their minds that they came to point out to the Empress that it was necessary for her to leave Blois and to proceed with the young prince over the Loire and to transport the seat of government thither. Marie Louise, tired of the hazards of a wandering life, remained immovable in the resolution of not going further away, in spite of the vivacity with which Jerome explained the reasons why he insisted on the matter. The princess would not yield. The officers of her suite, General Caffarelli at the head of them, thinking wrongly that violence was being done to Napoleon's wife, interfered in her favor in a somewhat tumultuous manner. 3 hours later, a Russian commissioner arrived to secure the persons of the Empress and of her son. Count Schwaloff arrived in Blois at 2 o'clock in the morning. This commissioner of the Allied powers, aide-de-camp of the Emperor of Russia, was accompanied by Baron de Saint-Aignan, equerry of the Emperor Napoleon and brother-in-law of the Duc de Viscount-Caulaincourt. He communicated the object of his mission, which was to conduct the Empress and her son to Orleans. General Schuvaloff's arrival gave the signal for the departure of the principal persons who had accompanied the Empress. Each went to fetch his passports at the mairie, a town hall, to have them viséed by the Russian officer whose lodgings were filled with people all day long. The majority of the ministers and counselors of state left for Paris. I saw the Minister of War, the Duc de Feltre Clark, who, with the smile which he always wore, told me that he had come to take farewell of his old colleague. He had been secretary to the cabinet and to hand him a letter which he had written to the emperor to take leave of him. He added that when one left people, it ought to be done politely, that he had to give an account of the state of the war archives, the depot of maps, and so on, that he did not want to be considered a thief. From that moment forward, it was put out of the Empress's power to join the Emperor. Whatever illusion she may have wished to retain on this point, the separation of the two spouses was decided. If the assurances since given by the Austrian ministers and by the Emperor Francis himself that she would be left to inhabit the island of Elba or her new states, or to divide her residence between Parma and the island of Elba, were sincere, it was no longer in their power to keep their promises, as had to be admitted later on. On April 9th, very early in the morning, I went to the Empress's house. I found her up and rather nervous as to how the journey would pass off. She sent for the crown jewels, which she did not very well know what to do with. Knowing that she would have to pass through the posts of Cossacks and be escorted by the foreign troops, she feared lest her carriages might be looted. She thought of carrying the various parures into which these jewels had been made upon her person, never doubting that her person would be respected. There remained the imperial sword, on the hilt of which the regent diamond had been mounted, and the blade of which was in the way. Unable to take anybody into my confidence, I was reduced to separate this blade from its handle by myself. And I had no tool at my disposal fit for such work. I had the idea of placing the blade under one of the fire dogs in the fireplace of the Empress's apartments, and to my great satisfaction I discovered that it was made of brass, so that I had little trouble in breaking it. I hid the hilt under my clothes, and I proceeded to my carriage through the hindrances occasioned by the block of horses and carriages, not without trembling for the safety of my precious burden. I had preserved the family papers and other valuable documents which the Emperor had ordered me to carry away from the Tuileries at the moment of our departure, to destroy them if they ran any risk of being seized or lost. Till then, I now thought that the latter circumstance had arrived, and threw them into the fire. I think it necessary to say that amongst these papers there were not the letters addressed by foreign sovereigns to Napoleon. They had formed part of this collection. We should know definitely what became of these curious documents, over the fate of which there has till now reigned an impenetrable obscurity. All the searches which were carried out by the Emperor's orders for these papers by King Joseph, the Duc de Bassano-Marais, and myself remained without result. After having been stolen from the Count de Servilliers, the name which King Joseph had taken, in the portmanteau sent from Paris to Point Brise, near New York, they are said to have fallen, according to the statement of Dr. O'Meara, into the hands of Murray, an English publisher in London. Monsieur de Liévin, the Russian ambassador to England, it is said, brought back his sovereign's letters for the sum of £10,000. As far as I can remember, the letters of this important collection, which possessed the greatest interest, had been written by Emperor Alexander, those written by the Spanish, Bavarian, and Württemberg princes, and some of those written by Prussia were also of a nature to excite curiosity, inasmuch as they were historical documents. The rest of the collection, so far as my memory serves me, was not of the same interest. However, as copies had been taken of them by the Emperor's orders, it is possible that this correspondence will appear one day. At 10 o'clock in the morning, after having received Count Schwelvaloff, the Empress, accompanied by her son and the princes and princesses of the imperial family, left Blois on her way to Orleans. At Beaugency, the Cossacks stopped the last carriages of her suite and looted them, but at General Schwelloff's command, everything that had been taken was restored. Marie Louise arrived in Orleans at 6 in the evening and received on her entry into the city by civil and military authorities. The National Guard and the garrison formed in line along her way up to the bishop's palace, where she alighted. These troops hailed her arrival with cries of "Long live the Emperor" and "Long live the Empress." During the night which followed on our arrival at Orleans, I received a ciphered letter which had been dictated by the Emperor on April 8th. This letter had been after me to Blois and had been forwarded on to Orleans. It filled me with grief and consternation. It had been written in a moment of discouragement and bore the impress of deep sorrow. The substance of this letter was that it had been agreed with the Emperor of Austria that the crown should pass to the King of Rome under the regency of the Empress, and that Mr. de Metternich was charged to formulate this covenant, that in this state of affairs it was necessary that the Empress should always be acquainted with the whereabouts of the Emperor of Austria, to have recourse to his protection, and that everything was to be looked for, even the Emperor's death. I was ordered to burn this letter after having read it, and to make what use of its contents I should think fit. I burned the letter in conformity with the behest which I was tempted to consider as the expression of a dying will. I was so disturbed by this fatal confidence that I thought it right to inform the Duchess de Montebello, who enjoyed the Empress's greatest confidence, and who by reason of her position was best able to keep up her courage and to comfort her if the misfortune which I feared were to come upon her. I then waited for news from Fontainebleau in terrible anxiety. The Empress had anticipated the wish expressed by the Emperor that she should keep herself in communication with her father in sending the Duc de Cador and Messieurs Regnault de Saint-Jean d'Angely, de Bausset, and de Saint-Aulard, one after the other, to the Emperor of Austria.